Well, good evening, everybody. It's very nice to see you here and to our people present on Zoom as well. When the Society was first founded just over 200 years ago, it had a very wide remit and it considered almost anything to do with Asia was fair game for scholarly discussion. And that included looking at the natural world, looking at economics, looking at sociology, looking at politics, as well as things for which the Society later became very famous, looking at the languages and the literature and the religion. And when we were planning the 200th anniversary celebrations, we decided it was a really good idea to try to open up the Society again to the very wide range of disciplines and interests, scholarly interests that there was in Asia. And tonight's talk is not at all out of line with something that you could have heard in the Society's rooms in 1824 or 1825. There would have been learned papers read about natural history and so on at that time. So it's a particular pleasure to welcome Andrew Laurie, who is a very distinguished zoologist, and he's also been a very distinguished person to make nice movies and to be incredibly scholarly and scientific about zoology and about observing. But of course, another great thing about all of that is that the application of this knowledge is of really very great importance. It was of great importance in the 1820s because people wanted to understand how they were going to run India and how they were going to make. And it's very important for us now because this sort of study will inform policy making and in public engagement on issues to do with the environment and cultural change and so on. So Andrew has an enormously distinguished career, and if you ever get a chance to watch the Anglia television survival series about rhinos in Nepal, you should, and you can see him standing on the back of an elephant as he walks through making a movie. But tonight he's going to talk to us about these wonderful little birds who inhabit the Altai Mountains in Central Asia. So Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to be able to share with you my fascination with dippers and also my concern for the wild species and natural environment of that remarkable country, Mongolia. I have a film to show you, the most recent in a series of 4 so far on the dippers of the Altai. The dipper is known in Mongolia as Gyatlan Omrut Harslai, which means, rather poetically translated, gleaming-breasted resident of streams that don't freeze over in winter. The films have all been shown on Mongolian television, most recently on Tengger TV, which means, translated, Sky TV, but the Mongolian version. The early ones were shown as part of an eco-TV series, whose title, Anyone Can Be an Ecologist, I tried not to take too personally. The idea, a sound idea, behind that series was that you don't have to have a huge research grant or a satellite tracking device or focus on large, charismatic, endangered species in order to make contributions to science and wildlife conservation, and that citizen science and citizen involvement also have important roles. Before showing the film, I'll tell you something about dippers in general. how I first got interested in them in the UK and why I started following them in Mongolia. After the film, I'll talk a bit about the threats to Mongolia's wild species and habitats and how they have been perceived and addressed over the last 3 decades since the end of the socialist state and the start of parliamentary democracy. The dippers of the UK and Mongolia look very different, although they're the same species, the white-throated dipper, but they're different subspecies. I got interested in dippers for the first time as a boy roaming the Downton estate near Ludlow in the River Team with my siblings, with a lot more freedom than is possible nowadays. And I wrote up my observations for the Shrewsbury School Natural History Society journal. I've been back to Downton several times over the years, this time with Tom Wall, former warden of the Downton Gorge Nature Reserve. And we tried to assess trends in local dipper populations. Numbers of dippers have fluctuated nationally, but there's been a definite downward trend over the last 60 years. In the 19th century, dippers were much more numerous. There was one winter report in Scotland on the River Ewe of 100 of them within a mile in 1879. Bounties were paid for dippers and for their nests, and people thought wrongly that dippers reduced fish catches. The Duchess of Sutherland, this is her estate, paid 6pence a dipper for 548 of them killed on her estate between 1831 and 1834, just in those 4 years. Dippers, fast-flowing streams and rivers, and they depend on an abundant supply of aquatic insect larvae, mainly caddisfly, mayfly, and stonefly larvae. So a thriving dipper population turns out to be a good indicator of water quality. There's 5 species dippers in the world. And in my work as a wildlife conservation biologist, overseas mainly, I've kept an eye out for them whenever I've been in likely places. The white-capped dipper of the Andes of northern South America, the rare rufous-throated dipper, which lives on the borders of Bolivia and Argentina, the American dipper, which stretches down the western seaboard of North America, and then on to Mexico and Panama. The brown dipper of the Tian Shan through to the Himalayas, China, Taiwan, and Japan. And our white-throated dipper, with the widest distribution of all, extending even into Africa. And also the most varied of them all, with 10 subspecies described. Its range extends all the way from Ireland to Mongolia and overlaps with the brown dippers from Kyrgyzstan to Sichuan. I worked as an environmental conservation advisor to the Mongolian government on several different assignments between 1995 and 2009. And I lived for a while in Hovd City here, about 1,200 kilometers west of Ulaanbaatar, capital. The city is home to about 30,000 people, which is about 1/3 of the population of the Aimag, or province. In January, the mean temperature is minus 19 degrees centigrade. In July, it's plus 20 degrees centigrade, a remarkable range of 41 degrees. I used to walk out from my apartment here in my spare time to explore the local area. And just outside the city, there's a stream that flows from a spring. The spring flows out at a temperature above freezing all winter. And there, each winter, I found up to 11 dippers congregating on the unfrozen stretch of water, which varied in length from half a kilometer to over a kilometer, depending upon the recent weather. My time was split between meetings with local and regional government officials in the city and getting out in the field by various means and visiting nature reserves and national parks. Conservation in Mongolia is practical and also spiritual. Here, one of the rangers of the national park is burning juniper and as an offering to the mountain. And also did a lot of talking with local residents, young and old. And whenever summer field trips took me near likely dipper spots, I looked out for them or signs of them. I wanted to know where those wintering dippers in the capital dispersed to, where they nested. I asked Mongolian ornithologists and local people, but no one knew. The rivers looked suitable, but I never found nesting dippers. There were plenty of other things to see. The plants of Mongolia include 300 which are restricted only to the Altai. And the Altai are also home to the snow leopard. I never saw one. In which my wife and I slept one night and left her footprints in the snow. And then years later, Gombobata, a professor from the National University of Mongolia, sent me this photograph of a dipper with 2 leaves in its beak, a sure sign it was nesting. He had tried to find the nest, but run out of time. It was in the Winch Gorge, about 200 kilometers south of Hof City and about 2,000 meters above sea level. And it was in an area I hadn't visited before. The following May, 2017, I made the long drive out to Hovt myself as a tourist. And I set up camp just above the gorge. And there, less than a mile away, the morning after arrival, I found a pair building their nest. It was in the bank of a small stream, the Hujirt, tributary of the main river. I had a small and enthusiastic team with me, Enkbat here and Batwire, and after watching and filming for a while on the Hujirt, we searched neighboring rivers and asked local people. We asked them whether they knew anything about dippers. Nest building was in full swing in the second half of May, over 2 months later than in the UK. And I was surprised at how low down near the water the dippers were building. One pair built at the end of a 40-centimeter long tunnel and just 10 centimeters above water level, even though there were afternoon surges of water level due to melting ice and snow. In Europe, adult dippers all look very much the same, so it's usually impossible, or else very difficult, to tell individuals apart. Mongolian dippers, however, vary a lot in their plumage, and that can make it much easier to distinguish the male from the female within a pair. That's really convenient for recording behavior, especially when the action is very fast. But it's only possible if male and female are of different morphs. In this pair, the male on the left was a light morph, and the female was dark morph. And in this pair, it was the other way around. And in this pair, both male and female were light morph, so we couldn't distinguish them easily. There is a third dark-breasted morph with no white bib. It's rare. I saw none, and few have been recorded in recent years. My friend Gombo Butter photographed this one in winter 2011. We've walked along many of the local rivers by now, looking not just for the birds themselves, but for their preferred food, here mainly cased caddisfly, and for their characteristic elongated droppings left on rocks, mainly in the midstream or else at the edge of the river. We've watched Altai dippers now over several breeding seasons and have discovered, among other things, that even before the chicks have hatched, the Mongolian males often come to the nest with food. We know from other studies that it's almost always the female dipper that incubates the eggs. There are exceptions. Males have been seen sitting on eggs, but only for short periods. So the Altai males feed the females as they incubate. Such behavior has been reported only a couple of times in Europe. It was observed in one Scottish study once or twice a day, and one Norwegian ornithologist who specialized in dippers saw it on 5 occasions in 30 years. In the Altai, on the other hand, males fed their mates over 28 times per day, and that's a substantial contribution to the female's diet. This difference in behavior between Europe and Mongolia is likely to be linked to differences in air and water temperatures and an abundance of their food. Mate feeding has also been reported in the American dipper in the north of its range, but not on the same scale as seen in Mongolia. As incubating females in the Altai are fed so well by the males, you might expect them to spend less time foraging for themselves, and that does seem to be the case. Females in the UK typically spend 9 to 12 minutes break after only 32 to 45 minutes on the nest, whereas in Mongolia, they take only 5 minutes break after 60 to 70 minutes on the nest. And in Mongolia, the female sometimes didn't even feed herself at all during her 5 minutes off the nest. Males do feed females during courtship in both Europe and Mongolia. So perhaps what was originally a pair bonding feeding ritual has developed in Mongolia into a pattern of substantive feeding that boosts breeding success in that environment. My observations have been just that. No capturing of birds, no wringing of legs, just sitting and watching, here on the right, up on the hill, here down by the water, enjoying the peace and quiet of camping in spectacular places and seeing other wildlife beside the dippers. Hiker are common along the river, relative of the rabbit, and Siberian ibex up on the hills, and talking with passers-by. I will now show you the film. It runs for about 50 minutes and leads into my closing comments on the wider context of conservation in Mongolia, which pick up on some of the comments during the film.
A pair of white-throated dippers feed their young.
1 second, let me just make sure it's a bit louder.
In their nest on a remote stream high up in the Mongolian Altai.
A few months after recording that, I was already making plans to return the following summer to make the 4th film in my series on the dippers of the Altai. I would have to be there a bit later in the season in order to catch the early life of the dippers after leaving the nest, but things didn't go to plan.
Like so many, I hadn't foreseen the COVID pandemic.
So in 2020 and 2021, I stayed at home in England. White-throated dippers are common in the UK, so I could film them here. But the Altai dippers behave very differently, and I wanted to learn more.
So in June 2022, after COVID travel restrictions had been lifted, I set off again for Mongolia. This is the story of what unfolded on that trip, my 4th dipper watching expedition to the Altai. I spent the first few days in Ulaanbaatar. Driver Hordle helped to gather equipment and supplies. Mukjago, Mongolian expedition storekeeper, issued most of the camping equipment. And we picked up other things in the shops with assistant Batpire. Soon we were on our way to the first of our dipper sites in the Altai. We are the same team as in 2019. It's Hordle's 2nd trip and Batpire's 4th. We're heading generally west, and we have about 1,400 kilometers to go. In Mongolia, it's the custom never to tempt fate by forecasting your arrival time. We've done 650 kilometers now, so we're almost halfway. We fill up with petrol at every opportunity, just in case of shortages ahead. New stretches of road have been opened since I was last here, and despite the occasional hold-up, we're making good progress. Hordle is very considerate of other road users. Apart from sheep and goats, the road has been pretty empty. This is the first significant traffic we've seen all day. We've done about 1,100 kilometers now, so not that far to go tomorrow. We're camping tonight 70 kilometers west of Altai IMAG Center. Today we'll head to Darif Sum in Hovd IMAG, past the Khoshot coal mine, and south via Tsetsek Sum Center to the Myangan Orgulsat National Park, specifically to the Hyakt River, where we filmed dippers feeding young in the nest in 2019. What we hope to see this year is the young out on the river. Hurle has changed his vehicle since the last time I was here, and his Russian-made furgon van is going very well. All the way down here from Tsetsek Sum, we haven't seen any water in the river. Only just in the last kilometre or so, there's been some stretches with water, but other stretches are still dry. It must be tough for the herdsmen around here. I wonder what we're going to find on the Hyakt. This is looking good. Lots of water. The water's clear, and there are plenty of dipper droppings on the rocks. There's a lot of dipper food, like the caddisfly larvae on the bottom of this stone I picked up from the stream bed. We set up camp yesterday, soon after we arrived. In the afternoon we searched upstream, but we found no dippers. And then in the evening, we went downstream. And there, about a kilometre below camp, we found first one and then a second dipper. A pair, one of them with darker plumage than the other. They obviously had a nest, and we found it very quickly. Both parents are feeding the young. A lot of caddisfly larvae and some aerial insects too. Each parent has been coming in with food about 8 times per hour so far this morning. You can hear the chicks calling each time one of them approaches the nest. It takes the parents only 1/6 of a second to hand over the food. Sampling, just to get an idea of what food is available. Insect nymphs and larvae, particularly cased caddisfly larvae, are really abundant right here by the nest. The parents also pick up the chicks' droppings, and usually take them to a particular rock in the center of the stream. By removing the droppings, dippers can make the nest less visible to predators. But this nest is on a sloping rock face, so traces of droppings are quite visible despite the efforts of the parents. I get to the nest each morning around 6 a.m. Both parents are usually feeding the chicks at that time. And this morning the male has been doing more than the female. In this pair, the darker bird is the female, and the lighter one is the male. We know because the darker one has been begging for food. After a flurry of activity, they'll sit and do nothing for a while, either some way away or here near the nest. It's usually the male who sits near the nest. But right now the female is sitting in front of me. The female doesn't preen so much when she's here, but the male spends 10-15 minutes preening and then singing kind of warbling song. Once he stood singing for 5 minutes right outside the nest. He may be passing on specific song patterns to his chicks. We walked 7 kilometers upstream looking for more dippers, but we found none, and no recent sign either. Then in the evening, we saw Siberian ibex, on the hill above camp.
Well, it's the 6th of July now. We've been here 5 days. We found this nest on the first evening. And we've been watching it on and off ever since.
The chicks are now being fed over 20 times per hour. This is the darker bird, the female. And here's the lighter one, the male. So the chicks are still in the nest.
And I don't know how old they are. We've had a glimpse when they reach out for food. But it's very quick.
Dipper chicks stay a long time in the nest, around 23 days. We don't want to spend the whole trip watching chicks being fed in the nest. We filmed that in 2019, so we have a decision to make.
Wait here for these chicks to come out, or go on somewhere else to find chicks already on the river. And so far, I'm in favor of staying here. The female is just back again. She's off again, far downstream. Here she is again. I'm just keeping a tally of how often she comes, how often he comes.
The female has been doing most of the feeding, 71 visits by her, only 40 by the male in 4.5 hours of observation. Sometimes, the moment a dropping falls from the nest, one of the parents flies in or swims in to pick it up. Once the female even fished a dropping out of the water. Overall, the adults are removing 3 or 4 droppings per hour, but they often let droppings accumulate under the nest for a while, and then have a blitz. Earlier this morning, they took away 5 in 5 minutes, and then 12 in 30 minutes. The female is taking away twice as many as the male. Here's the female with food. Back to the normal rock, and then a low, and the male too. They often dive for food right here opposite the nest. Sometimes making 3 or 4 feeds in a row before flying off again. They also take insects on land, but much more rarely.
Just before going to sleep, just going through and tallying things. Otherwise, it gets a bit of a mess and can't read what one's written in a hurry.
The young ones are still in the nest. They're getting bigger and bigger. They almost look like they're falling out to the front of the nest with their beaks pointing down towards the water, almost as if they're overbalanced one day.
Hurle has joined me, and also Usukpar, who is here with his family. They have set up a couple of gairs just downstream. His father, Jamyan Nedak, came over to see us earlier. They are collecting meadow cranespill leaves for marketing as a herbal tea. Usukpar is very interested in what we are doing. He's never seen a dipper nest before.
Yes, I think it's what the frogs they must have very 사실 그건 이제 더 나가. 이제 그치. 알아. 예수 ямар хурд өгчөөсэй.
Доороос нь бооч харж болохгүй юу? Бид саад өгмөг. Аюул чадаа хэрвээ уурхан явна. Ийс уурхан. Эд гап. Даран open.
As with all wildlife watching, there are long periods when nothing much happens, and then suddenly there's a burst of activity. When the parents meet at the nest, they use a recognition call that reinforces the bond between them. That may be important in preventing attacks by intruding males. We've set up a trail camera to catch any activity at night. We got Usukwaya's horse, but the birds are so fast they leave no image. On the walk down here this morning, I saw a nightjar fluttering around me. When they land, you look again, and in a flash, they're gone.
Chicks are still in the nest. One in particular has his head really way down, looking out of the nest, down towards the river, almost like he's wondering what's out there. But they still get fed.
The chicks start calling well before the parents arrive at the nest. It may be that they're responding to communication from the parents that we cannot hear. And they call even when the parents are just picking up droppings.
I keep a tally of the number of feeds in every 10-minute period.
The chicks are being fed more often today, around 25 times per hour. But in each hour, there are 2 or 3 10-minute periods without feeds.
Just now there was a horse above the nest. And the female was very reluctant to come and feed.
The dipper alarm call is particularly strident above the roar of the water. Hurle and Batbayr are suggesting we move camp to be nearer the nest. But I'm quite happy with the 20-minute walk. We are keeping disturbance from everyday camp life away from the nest. And it really can't be that long now before the chicks are out of the nest anyway.
It's our 7th day here, and the chicks are still in the nest. They're sticking their heads out further and further, and they seem well feathered, so they should be out soon.
I've seen up to 3 heads at the same time, but dipper chicks come to the front in turn, resting at the back after being fed, and I guess there are more than 3. It's 8:30 now, and this chick is looking pretty interested in the outside world. Here he comes. Yes, the first one is out. And there was another just behind. He already seems to be almost bobbing. The dipping of the dipper. He's clinging fast to the rock with those big dipper feet and claws.
It's amazing. The female is just upstream, but not really taking any notice. And the young one's going slightly, almost slipping down the slope now, pecking a little bit at the rock.
The female has gone away. Looks like he wants to go back into the nest now, trying to turn around. It's amazing how completely they're fledged in that nest. Managed to fly straight across. Young dippers can both fly and swim strongly when they leave the nest at the normal age. The chick has been on its own for a while. There's no sign of any of its siblings following yet. It's now 20 minutes since it emerged. Here's the female, back with food. Now the male has started feeding too. The chick has been going in and out of this cave beside the nest. This is really odd. I don't know what's going on here. It almost looks as if she's trying to brood the chick again. I've never seen anything like it, in any species. She's singing constantly. In Europe, female dippers rarely sing after incubation starts, so it's interesting to see her singing so much here. The female stood on the chick's back for about 30 seconds and has been gently pecking it for another 90 seconds since. The chick seems submissive, almost crouching at times. Is the mother teaching it something? Otkenbair, Usukbair's brother-in-law, arrived back from collecting meadow cranespill leaves just now, and has joined me at the nest. Another chick seems ready to leave. Meanwhile, the first chick to emerge has got stuck trying to climb out of the water. The female has fed this chick 40 times since it left the nest, and during those 6 hours, she's fed the chicks in the nest 80 times. Both chick and mother have gone upstream. Budbeir is helping to keep track of the chick's movements. The female is still splitting her time, feeding out on the river about 6 times per hour and in the nest about 10 times per hour. I'm spending most of my time at the nest, waiting for a second chick to emerge. The first chick has just come back to that cave beside the nest. That's a foot out now. Is this another one coming out? No.
Well, that was a pretty phenomenal day.
Apart from the excitement of seeing the first chick emerge, this is what stood out today. Extraordinary behaviour.
It had the effect of making the fledgling lie down.
Between us, we've seen it 5 times, mainly by the female.
she would flap her wings and also peck him a little bit.
It happened just after feeding, and she sang each time throughout. Could this be strengthening the chick's leg muscles? We saw the male doing it once, also singing and pecking the chick. Both parents pecked the chick on other occasions too.
The male, I haven't seen since 11 o'clock this morning. He fed the young one on the river a few times and then disappeared.
Another chick has just come out of the nest, and he's going gingerly down the slope, just like yesterday's chick. And just like yesterday, straight into that little cave by the nest. He's heading downstream now. I'm going to follow him for a bit.
Now I'm back at the nest and waiting for the other two chicks to emerge. The male is back, having been absent from 11 yesterday morning until evening. Now he's feeding the chicks in the nest. And the female too. And they're still taking the droppings away.
Quite surprising, I think, to be continuing this late, even after two chicks have already left the nest. In Europe, dippers stop collecting the droppings up to a week or more before the chicks leave the nest. I got here at 6 this morning, and this is the first sign of activity. She's fed the nestlings 8 times in the last 10 minutes. Over the whole day yesterday, she fed the chicks 10 times per hour, compared with the male, who only fed them twice an hour.
One of the chicks is now putting his head out and looks as if he might be going to make a move. Well, he's retreated back in again now. So it looks like a long wait.
The two chicks on the river are difficult to find unless we see the parents arrive with food.
Mudbuyer had spotted them under the bank, 2 different places, without the help of the parents.
Waiting near the chicks, we eventually see one of the parents, mainly the female so far. The chicks come out of their hiding places and beg frantically for food as soon as they hear or see one of the parents coming. Otken Bayer's daughter was very excited to see a chick being fed just below her gare, about 300 meters downstream of the nest.
Apart from a little wander down to look at one of the fledglings that left in the last 2 days, I've been here watching the nest in the hope of seeing the next fledglings leave. And they don't look as if they're going to leave today. They've been fed a lot. The female has fed them 120 times in just under 9 hours of observation. The male in that time has fed them 5 times. She feeds them in spurts, one feed a minute, and then there's a lull. And during that lull, the nestlings look as if they're going to get out of the nest, but then she feeds them and they seem to relax again. So I'm wondering whether if she just didn't feed them so much, they would have got out of the nest by now. Well, I didn't have long to wait.
There's one chick at the cave. I think it's a new one. The nest is certainly empty. The female is tearing out the inside of the nest, taking feathers, lining, and other bits and pieces out of the nest repeatedly. Then flying or swimming across to the normal landing rock and disposing of them in the water. So all the remaining chicks must have left the nest, I guess earlier this morning. This is the 4th day since the first chick emerged. I had expected them to come out closer together. The chick has come out of the cave and is trying in vain to get mother's attention. In Europe, dippers also remove the nest lining after the chicks have fledged, but I'm surprised at the intensity with which she is working here, while totally ignoring the nearby chick. This behaviour may help remove nest parasites, important for dippers who often reuse their nests. Now the chick is coming along the shore, apparently trying to get closer to the female. He's doing pretty well swimming across the stream. But the female doesn't seem ready to stop her nest clearing. The chick arrives moments after the female takes off. And then again, she shuns the chick. She's been clearing the nest like this on and off for 40 minutes now, with the same single-mindedness as earlier. The chick went back to the cave, where the female eventually flew off upstream, with the chick hurrying along behind. Since then, she's been feeding that third chick constantly. She usually forages very near the chick. The chicks are getting more and more agile, but they still almost fall in from time to time, particularly when it's windy. Budweiser went way downstream, where she found what we think is fledgling 1 and settled in to watch for a while. The female arrived soon after, and there was other wildlife to watch too. And meanwhile, I found what is probably fledgling 2, distinguishable by his pale-coloured legs. He emerged from the grass a little way away from the river as soon as the male arrived nearby.
It's been raining for about 3.5 hours. It's the first time we've had heavy rain, so we've been lucky. But now it's really pouring down. The morning was fine. We found both the male and the female feeding their chicks. Spotted 4 of them.
The chicks are often in pairs now. We think there are 4 chicks in all. Clutch size in dippers ranges from 3 to 6, but is most often 4 or 5. There's the chick with pale legs again, at the back of the cave. When there's a pair, the female has been sharing out the food more or less equally. The chicks defecate as if they were still in the nest, turning and backing up.
We saw the female again cleaning her nest out.
And again totally ignoring one of her chicks, who was begging for food nearby. In England, many pairs raise 2 broods of chicks successfully. The female removes the nest lining and then relines the same nest before laying a second clutch. Here in the Altai, nesting begins 2 or 3 months later than in England, and I doubt there's ever enough time to raise 2 broods. The instinctive nest cleaning behaviour persists, though. It's about 6:30 p.m. now on the 14th of July. The chicks are still all surviving. They're being fed by the parents in various combinations. The chicks move between parents, spending time downstream with the female, and then going upstream to the male. But the male is doing much less feeding than the female, and doesn't always respond to the chicks' begging calls. The chicks are pecking at various things, but not feeding themselves substantially yet. But this is really a learning and practice phase. Sheltering under the bank provides protection from the sun and from birds of prey. Dippers are the only birds with white feathered eyelids, and conspicuous blinking is believed to form part of their communication and displays. Dippers have a particularly large preen gland at the base of the tail, and they take oil from it and coat their feathers to keep them waterproof. Without that, their aquatic lifestyle would be impossible. It helps them both to keep warm and to keep their feathers efficient for swimming. From time to time, 1 or 2 chicks have sheltered overnight in a little cave by the nest. This morning, the female yet again spent time clearing the nest out. Again so single-mindedly that she ignored the chick that was begging for food at the cave entrance. So that's 3 days running she's been nest clearing. And that's on top of feeding the chicks, who are now often up to 500 meters away. This afternoon, we were watching down by the Gares when we were invited in to drink meadow cranesbill tea on the occasion of the annual Nadam festival. It was a big party with visitors from Hoft IMAG Center. "17th of July today, and we've decided to leave tomorrow, back to Ulaanbaatar. The chicks are now hunting for food more effectively and feeding themselves more and more. They're still experimenting, but they're improving fast. Now much of what they pick up is edible. Dippers are able to see well both in air and water. They can adjust the curvature of the eye lens, in common with other diving birds such as cormorants. They use their long toes and claws to cling to rocks both above and below water, and in swimming too. Litter, like this glass, is rare here, nothing like we find on English rivers. Even so, one chick almost got snagged by a piece of wire. The chicks are moving around much more and generally extending their range upstream. We've seen them up to 800 meters from the nest. Recently, we've seen chicks in groups of 3. I think chick number 2 is the only one with pale legs, so we can track his movements. Here he is 4 days ago, and again 2 days ago, 400 meters upstream. This is him too, catching an adult tipulid, a cranefly. This chick, I think either 5 or 6 days after emergence, rather nervously went after a cranefly larva. This is the same movement he will later use to crack open caddisfly cases. Particularly by the female, who's been working very hard. The male is now feeding them less and less. He still feeds them from time to time, but mostly he ignores them. Difficult to do when he's being followed and pestered by begging chicks. Sometimes he starts to feed himself. And the chick starts feeding too. It's almost a lesson. He still pecks them at times too. But the chicks still follow him around, despite being fed very little. Then, after a while, they give up and go off to forage on their own. Today, for the first time, I saw the female ignoring begging chicks. Soon the chicks will have to feed themselves.
The female and the male have almost divided the territory into upper and lower, with the male mainly in the upper part and never in the lower part, and the female mainly in the lower part and extending a bit into the upper part. We had never seen any of them, male or female or fledglings, up at our camp. But yesterday we saw the male for the first time, and today we saw 3 fledglings up here with him.
They're flying pretty strongly now. He's investigating our camp refrigerator there.
The female has continued until at least the 15th, 2 days ago, to clean the nest out.
And we are still seeing this really puzzling behavior, the adult climbing on the back of the chick. The pattern is the same as we saw with the first chick. The adult singing and pecking the chick. Sometimes it looks like mating behavior. But both male and female do it. And they sometimes stand sideways on the chick's back. It must be pretty common, at least in this pair. We've seen it 2 or 3 times daily, recently almost always by the female. Even one of the chicks attempted something like it. We discussed it over an extended tea this morning.
Тэгэхээр доошо бие хамгаалаарэ гэж маш ээж нь айгүйх юу ээж магадгүй л дээ.
Сүслэг.
Ой тийм хаална. Нөгөө нэг хоёрыг тийм зураг авч яхад энийг бол чи 2 3 атсан гэж эргэлдээд гараад
Ингээд лифмэт яваад орж ирээд.
We continued over tea to talk about what we have seen.
Ингээд улаан газар байж. Энэ бол одоо ингээд намар гэж хүүтрээл өвөл боллоо гэж бүр хүүтэн болчихно. Тэрнээс өмнө бол юу гаяа. Тоолонда бүх юмаа сурцсан байх хэвээр. Хүүхдэн баалаа гэж хэдрөөсөө баас гэсэн тэр доор нь ингээд сангасан. Тэр доор нь ингээд цэвэрлээл. Тэгээ хошуугаа угаагаад ер нь бол их ажилсаг цэвэрч.
ганцаархнаа бол амжихгүй хэцүү. Хоёулаа хоо зөөж хоёулаа ингэж хамт яжээж тэр дүүрийг гэсэн мэт дөрүүлэнгийн юм яах вэ?
Тэгээд хажуугаар нь заримдаа ингээд өнгөтэй тийшээсээ манга хоттой явж суг байсан.
Эхний өдөр яг одоо бов 20-30 метрийн зайд гэлнэсэг. Одоо бүр ингээ нэг 7 хоногийн дараа чинь бүр ингээ метрийн зайд явж байна гэх чинь.
Тэгээ ер нь бол бас дээд доотлолт нь бол нэг доотлын ээж нь аваад дээдлэн аав нь аваад ч юм уу тий. Ингээ хязгаарлалтанд бол аав ээж нь бол.
We talked also about dippers as indicators of healthy rivers.
Энэ бол харцлаа байгаа бол санаа зовхгүй суухад бол болох юм байна.
Тэгээд нутгийн хүмүүс байртай байх хэрэг хэрвээ харцлаа байна.
Амраа гол нь энэ нутгийн ийм залуу хүүхдүүдэд айгүй танин мэдүүлэхтэй байхгүй.
Яг ингээд сонирхоод ингээд судлаад хүмүүс анхаарлаа хандуулаад эхлэхээр болоод шал өөр. Өнөөдөр л ихэд жишээ нь доороос ингээд хөөгөө зураг аваад ирэхэд юу өглөөний цай битгээл баг өдөр донд хүртэл ингээд хөөгөл хүрээд ирж байгаа. Сонирхолтой байгаа байхгүй тий. Нөгөө тэнтэйгөө хөөцөлгээд
цаг бол айгүй яг ерөнхийдөө яг янгууд цаг айгүй хурдан тий.
Голдын чимээ хажууд амдарч байна.
Унтахад бараг голын чимээ голын дуу бараг дасчих шиг байна даа.
Би бол дуртай.
Дуртай.
Тэр голын чимээ.
Би дуртай.
Хамгийн сүүл сая өнөөдөр
Гурван харддаг энд майхны энд ирээ гаргаж өгөх болчих шүү дээ.
Тийм. Бүр манай майхны энд хүрч ирсэн шүү дээ.
Careful checking of the video clips shows there were 5 chicks in all. There were 3 in the nest on the 10th, when we knew there were another 2 out on the river that day. So after 15 days here, it's time to go. We have stopped to say goodbye to our neighbours. There's only one lady in camp, and she's glad of our help bringing the meadow cranesbill in out of the rain. After another cup of meadow cranesbill tea, we're off again on the long drive to Ulaanbaatar. We resupplied at the first shop we found, and we have mobile reception. There's a lot of holiday traffic on the road. People really like getting out of the city, and some of the popular overnight spots get pretty crowded. And so, back to Ulaanbaatar, back to city life. I was honored to have my dipper films shown on television and to be invited to talk about dippers and conservation. Many conservation groups are active in Mongolia, especially in the cities, and they work both independently and with government to build support, share their passions, and tackle the threats to wild species and habitats that ultimately endanger human livelihoods. Riverine health can be damaged by poorly managed mining and by poorly managed livestock herding too. Strong legislation on water use and the protection of riverbank habitats and the establishment of river basin organizations provide a basis for local conservation action. Birdwatching is growing in popularity fast, and greater involvement of rural people in monitoring biodiversity, for example, could enhance river basin conservation efforts valley by valley. The people we've met on these various dipper quests have all showed a lot of interest in the bird. We know that the dipper is a good indicator of healthy rivers. Our fates are linked. Dipper and man in the Altai both suffer from the effects of water pollution and rising temperatures. I think the dipper should be adopted as a symbol, a focus for wider public involvement in river basin conservation. Quiet watching and learning about the life of this little bird has enthralled us again, has aroused the interest of our neighbours in the valley, and has drawn attention to the importance of the dipper and its insect prey as indicators of water quality. We followed chicks from emergence over their first 10 days on the river. From full dependence on the parents to being able to feed themselves. And we discovered this intriguing behaviour, perhaps something to learn more about on our next visit to the Altai.
But glad to see people are still here. Last month, Kuntsulma Otchipat, who was the first president of Mongolia, died aged 82. He was the president who oversaw the end of the Socialist Republic in 1992. Government policy over the previous decades had favored industrialization and economic development with little attention to environmental impacts. And the population, the human population, had doubled in the previous 25 years. Otchibrat himself was a mining engineer and a former minister of mining. So when he called for eternal sustainable development as better than a too rapid leap forward that leads to destruction, he was listened to. At the 1992 UN Environment Conference in Rio de Janeiro, Mongolia proposed that the whole country be designated as a biosphere reserve. And Environment Minister Zambin Bachagal said that Mongolia has the rare opportunity to choose the optimal strategy of sustainable development and to abandon the former system, which led to the wasteful and lopsided exploitation of natural resources and the destruction of ecological equilibrium. He told me that Mongolia should be careful to limit exploitation of mineral resources to a level that provided for the needs of the population while keeping environmental damage to a minimum. And Puntsak Jasrai was Prime Minister from 1992 to 1996, observed that making environmental conservation and sustainable use our immediate national goal is to create the socio-economic basis for a proper relationship between people and nature. During the 1990s, Mongolia re-established its Ministry of Nature and Environment, passed far-reaching environmental laws, established a comprehensive network of protected areas, and became one of the first nations to produce and approve in Parliament in 1996 the National Biodiversity Conservation Action Plan. Full implementation of that plan would have controlled damaging industrialization and mining projects with strong environmental protection measures. And it would have seen a massive increase in renewable energy generation, and it would have kept livestock numbers within grazing capacity. It's widely agreed that although progress has certainly been made, it falls short of expectations. A lot of sound environmental legislation has been passed, but implementation has not really kept up. And in the late 1990s, strong pro-mining lobbies facilitated legislation favorable to mining. Generations of Mongolians have lived in the wide open spaces of the Altai. And the traditional herding lifestyle actually treads pretty lightly on the land. But human impact on the environment is growing. Higher numbers of livestock are degrading rangeland and contributing to water pollution. When livestock herding was organized under the collectives, the Soviet era, grazing was more evenly distributed through government-maintained wells and social support mechanisms, education and medicine. And a guaranteed meat market kept stocking densities relatively low. Now, the total number of livestock in the country is estimated to be 70 to 75 million, 3 times what it was in 1995. The market for cashmere encouraged people to keep more goats, increasing the proportion of goats from around 15% to around 50% or more in some regions. And goats, with their sharp little hooves and their broad diets, are particularly destructive. Hunting of wildlife continues, and the environmental impacts of mining are growing, including pollution, excessive water use, and associated transport infrastructure. Artisanal mining too. Mechanisms have been established for local level agreements to try and reduce impacts. These are agreements between mines and local residents. However, many operations actually go ahead without them, and the guidelines are not sufficiently participatory. The climate crisis is hitting Mongolia severely. Temperatures are rising rapidly, twice as fast as the global average. 2 degrees centigrade rise between 1940 and 2015. Rainfall is becoming unpredictable, and glaciers have receded at the rate of about 1% per year for the last 30 years, with some glaciers now gone altogether. It's actually threatening the very survival of the traditional herding lifestyle. The government has been active in conservation, often in partnership with NGOs and development organizations. Hundreds of animal traps were confiscated by rangers here in Hovd in 2016 as part of a broad approach to tackling damage to wildlife and the ecosystem. Nature reserves, national parks, and other state protected areas now make over 21% of the country. However, management on the ground is patchy, and almost all protected areas are poorly funded. And even well-managed protected areas, although vital, are not sufficient on their own. Their boundaries do not always follow watersheds, and activities upstream can pose threats. Also, many species, the Mongolian gazelle in particular, have ranges greater than any single protected area. The Mongolian gazelles even range into China and Russia. So sound environmental policies and action outside protected areas are also vital. Our dippers are particularly susceptible to the impacts of actions upstream. Here's an example from the Altai. Mining or mining exploration takes place upstream of the Mungharken National Park, on the left in green. And water extraction from mining is planned at the site of the Big Red Arrow on the Nutskan River, which has a thriving dipper population. Although there's good institutional and legal basis for conservation, implementation and planning have fallen short of expectations, and also massive corruption has enriched individuals at the same time as poverty, both financial and lifestyle. Public protests have been common, particularly as the scale of corruption and the extent of mining deals perceived as overly favorable to outside developers has emerged. Protests also focus on the air quality in Ulaanbaatar, where air pollution in winter constitutes a major threat to human health. Mining has expanded ahead of environmental controls, and the impacts have been exacerbated by the location of many mining operations at the headwaters of major river systems. Pollution and water extraction have had significant impacts on both biodiversity and on herding livelihoods. Political and strategic decisions coming under scrutiny. heavy investment in transport links to China for export of coal, in the face of likely phasing out of coal burning, is causing concerns about expensive white elephant development. Many people, including well-respected scientists, have lodged strong objections to a recent government proposal to develop a border crossing from China directly into the Great Gobi Strictly Protected Area, a project that was abandoned some years ago on environmental grounds. It's claimed that a recently agreed large-scale collaboration with France on uranium extraction can be done safely for both people and the environment. I'm not an expert in that, but I accept that this might indeed provide an opportunity to strengthen environmental safeguards and to provide more social benefits from mining revenues for the Mongolian people. Livestock numbers, as I said, are too high. The current stock's reproductive capacity is at least double the domestic demand for meat, and there is only a small export market. Yet the cultural reverence afforded to the herding lifestyle seems at times to have inhibited effective action to reduce the national herd size. For example, livestock head taxes have gone uncollected. Herders have been authorized in breach of the law to graze their livestock in protected areas in periods of hardship, in periods of drought. Goat herders have received financial compensation when market prices have fallen. And herders who have lost livestock in severe winters have been compensated so that they could restock, even though restocking in the absence of other measures actually exacerbates the problem. It's difficult for elected or politically appointed officials to advocate strict controls on grazing, including reductions in herd sizes, in the absence of a comprehensive program of reforms in the sector, including, for example, profitable export market linked possibly to animal breeding, to organic step-raised credentials and improved veterinary services, but preferably not to intensification of livestock production in small plots, which could be even more damaging. Progress is being made in improving coordination across sectors, but preemptive action is required before permanent damage is done by this large numbers of livestock. Happily, as you saw towards the end of the film, more and more Mongolians are becoming advocates of the importance of biodiversity, both for its intrinsic value and as the basis of human life and the national economy. Although many of the immediate goals of the various internationally funded conservation projects that I have worked on have not been achieved completely, I find it encouraging that when I visit Mongolia, I see so many of the people I worked with on those projects still active in furthering the cause of environmental conservation, whether in government or in opposition, in commerce, in law, in the arts, in NGOs, in international development agencies, in consultancy companies, environmental consultancy companies, in ecotourism, or in further education. Standing various drawbacks of such conservation projects, that one is an important benefit, albeit a delayed one, and one that is not usually reflected in standard final evaluations of such projects. Promising news includes a major government anti-corruption strategy, renewed attention on enriching a national wealth fund to channel mining profits into health, education, and housing, as opposed to cash handouts. Cash handouts are also welcome and also make people aware that there's money being made. There's a recent one in process at the moment, just before the Mongolian New Year, Saturday. And separating out tourism from the then Ministry of Environment and Tourism was also, I think, a positive step, because tourism created conflicts of interest. And the Ministry of Nature and Environment is now called the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. I think that's all positive. And also a recent community-based initiative with the Nature Conservancy, an American NGO, and in collaboration with the government, called Eternal Mongolia, harking back perhaps to President Orchibat's Eternal Sustainable Development I mentioned earlier. So I hope that actions now and in the future will allow these little birds to continue to thrive on their clear Altai streams for many years to come, as well as all the other species, including the people of Mongolia.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew, for fascinating, a very beautiful film, but also a fascinating explanation of the implications of the film for such wide and important current political and social problem. We have time briefly for a question or two, if anyone would like to raise them. Yes, please.
Thank you for such an interesting presentation. Do you have any plans to go to Mongolia anytime soon? And what's maybe the next? I think you said there's 4 films. What's the next stage?
I'm planning to go quite soon in June this year. Shall I stand near that? In June this year. And as I said at the end of that film, I'm interested in this curious behavior. I've asked many scientists and people who are expert on dippers and other birds too. And it's really a puzzle why those birds are standing on the backs of the chicks. So I'd like to follow up on that. And also follow up in general on these surveys of where they're being successful in breeding and where they're not being successful. I've got quite a bit of information on which rivers have dried up when, and looking at really the reasons for that. So adding to that.
Lady at the back.
Thank you. That was fabulous. I just fell in love with the dipper. 2 questions. First of all, how do they survive winter? Second one is that this ocean must have some adaptation value.
No. Well, they survive because they have particular. There's many birds which will occupy very cold waters and live in very cold conditions, but they do have ability to, when their legs are in the water, for example, they're not losing heat as we would when our legs go in the water. Their circulation adaptations. No, no. But the main problem would be food, because they don't have so many of these insects around. And I didn't include a picture, but when we were watching them in the city in the winter, they don't do in the summer. And so they adapt their diet in the winter. And the other question you asked about the bobbing. There's lots of people have brought up various possibilities as explanations. And it's not at all clear what the advantage is. It must be, as you say, you'd expect it to have some importance, because you saw that bird was doing it as soon as he came out of the nest. So it's really deeply ingrained. It could be some kind of communication, or it could be even, some people have said it's hiding, moving around like the water, just so but that they're not seen. And other people say that they're communicating with each other in this way. And as I mentioned, they also communicate with the blinking. It's not actually blinking. So it's a signaling with those feathered eyelids, not just blinking as a involuntarily. They're actually using it as a signal.
Please.
Connections, ecology, birds, policy. Do you think a person outside of Mongolia?
Yeah. Well, you mean us here or generally? Yeah. I think that the way that mining is going is damaging. And I mentioned about the French proposal to mine uranium. Uranium is really tricky to mine, but it needs very, very stringent environmental protections. And I think they would bring it. I think that branching out to have, and there are overseas miners operating there, but having mining done with greater environmental protection is very important. So all the technology that can be given for that. But they'll need more than just mining. Coal mining is really reducing in value to the country. Recently, in the last, even this year so far, sales of coal from Mongolia have been sometimes higher in volume than in previous years, but the revenue has been way down because the market is going down. And there has to be a shift to economies which are not reliant on digging up precious land to make money. And that's where possibly the agriculture can play a role, and that animal breeding and controlling the herd size so that production is not it's not a boom and bust. At the moment, the population goes up and then down again. Overall, it's going up, but in particular years, there's high mortality, and then the condition of the animals is very low, and so they can't sell meat on the international market. So I think that help with developing that would be very important, and encouragement. The government at the moment is making a big effort to control the corruption, and I think that's one that really need praise for that. And it's ongoing at the moment. And so I think that there's those various ways. It's not really what we can help with immediately, but I think the diversification of the economy is important, and extra protection in the mining industry and transport associated.
Well, I think we should pause at this point. I'm overcome with admiration for your patience in watching these birds, and also in the wonderful discoveries that you've made about their behaviour. And let us thank Andrew, and please join us with a glass of wine or juice. Thank you.
Yes.